Hi, my name is Mark. Most guitarists and musicians in general worry only about soloing and improvising. And of course you need to improve your soloing and improvising skills. But if you play an instrument like guitar or piano, that not only work as melodic instruments, but also as harmonic instruments, you gotta practice both sides of the instrument.
Whoa, what?
That means you can play both single note line stuff, or you can play chords. And since you have the ability to play both, you gotta practice both. I mean, the same way you learn licks and solos, you should try and learn new chords and chord progressions.
What?
Sometimes, a couple of spicy chords here and there are much more useful than a crazy lick.
Why would you say something so blasphemous?
And many times, you've actually even heard these chords.
Say what?
Whether it was in a song or in a movie, there's a good chance you've heard these chords. You don't need to go digging deep into jazz or film scoring or whatsoever to try and add interesting chords to your playing. In this video, I'm going to show you 5 chord progressions or chordal movements, I guess, that you've probably heard before and you didn't know you did. Or perhaps you've listened to a song and thought it was really cool, but since you didn't go learn it, you don't know what's going on.
Wow.
And this is particularly interesting because you can add these chords and chord movements to your chord repertoire and make your playing sound more interesting without sounding completely crazy. And even if you don't actually get to use these chords, you can't ever know enough. Let's get to it. Okay, here's the first chord movement progression thing. If you're into jazz, you've probably heard this one, and perhaps you probably even know it. You only need 3 chords to play this, and it's a pretty generic thing. The jazz guys call it a 2-5-1, and it's pretty easy to understand. If you're in C major, for instance, the second chord of the C major scale is a D minor, but jazz people are posh, so they play a D minor 7 instead of a D minor. And then you play a G7, which is a G major, the 7th on it. And then it resolves beautifully to the C major. In this case, a C major 7.
That sweet, luscious jazz.
If you understand a little bit of music theory, it's pretty easy to understand. It's just a bunch of cadences. You got a 5-1 cadence, then you got another 5-1 cadence. You're just playing the chords. Number 2 is the minor 4 chord. It's important to say that if you listen a lot to the Beatles, for instance, you've probably heard a bunch of these chords and chord movements. They're kind of the kings of interesting and spicy chords in pop music. And the use of the minor 4 chord is pretty present in their songs. Here's the thing. If you're in C major, if you go from the 5 chord to the 1 chord, you got this sense of resolution. And once you analyze it, it's pretty much because when you have a C chord, you have the 1, the 3rd, the 5th, and then in this case we have the octave again. If you have a G chord, you have the 1, the 5th, in this case you have the octave, the 1 again, the 3rd. And when you go from G major to C major, a really cool thing that happens is going from B to C. This kind of resolution becomes much more apparent when you use a G7 instead of just a G. Because when you add the 7th of G is the 4th of C. And as I talked about it in a different video, I'll leave a card right here. If you have the 1 and the 4th, you have a sus chord. And it wants to resolve back to the 3rd. So you have this contrary motion when you have a G7 to C major. You have this upwards motion from B to C. And then you have this downwards motion from F to E. This is what people call a perfect cadence. And you have this weaker cadence, which is called a plagal cadence, which is when you go from the 4 chord to the 1 chord. As you can see, you actually have this resolution. You can apply the same concept here. If you have F major, which is the 4 chord of C major, when you're going from F major to C major, you can think of it as that A resolving to a G. And that kind of makes sense because you're going from the 6th to the 5th. And when you have a C major chord, you have the 5th in there. And you can think again of the F resolving a half step down to E to the third. And you can clearly hear that it's not as powerful as the perfect cadence. You can feel the resolution, but it's not as strong. And it's mainly because of this. When you have a G, that third of the G is walking up to C. It's just a half step resolution. When you have that third of the F, you're jumping a higher interval. But we can change that. We can keep the resolution from F to E. Instead of doing a resolution from A to G, we can do a resolution from A flat, making the 4 chord a minor chord instead of a major chord. Instead of going, we would be going, and at least to me, that sounds much more powerful. If we leave the key, let's go to A major for this one. You have your perfect cadence. You have your play cadence. But if you want to spice up your chord progression, you can use that 4 chord, but in a minor version. In fact, what many people do is splitting that 4 chord, making it half of the time major and half of the time minor, like this. If you put it in the context of a song, it sounds much more interesting than. Adding this little D minor makes a ton of difference. This next one is what's usually called as the Picardy cadence or the Picardy third. You've probably listened to it in movies or in classical music, and it's basically when you have this chord progression, which is in C major, A minor. It consists of, instead of resolving on that relative minor chord, the A minor, you turn that A minor into an A major, kind of like. It makes this slightly more interesting and kind of epic. You can hear it more when you go. And that's a cool little touch that you can add when you're ending your song. Or you can build your song around it. For instance, if you've heard Kiss from a Rose by Seal, you can hear that. Our fourth chord thing is another one of those jazz tricks. Basically, when we have a dominant 7th chord, in this case let's use, for instance, a dominant 7th. You can substitute this A7th for a bunch of chords. You can substitute it for C sharp diminished, for instance. And you can use a bunch of shapes. You can use C sharp half diminished, or C sharp minor 7 flat 5 is the same chord. You can go full diminished. This kind of fits well with the first example of the 2-5-1. Let's hear it in context. You could hear in this first example that even though it was a different chord, you can kind of feel the same vibe as before. And even if you do a substitution with the other examples, it also works. But you gotta be careful of the melody that's going over these chord changes. Let's hear it out. I kind of messed it up a little bit in there, but it's pretty easy to understand. Also related to this, another substitution you could make is the tritone substitution. And it's actually pretty cool. It gives a chromatic vibe to the whole thing. So you have again A dominant 7. If you're doing it on this shape, and you switch the bass note from being an A to being a D sharp or an A flat, you get another dominant 7th. But this time, instead of being an A dominant 7, it's a D sharp dominant 7. And this is another cool thing you can use, using a 2-5-1 example again. Sometimes it may sound a little bit odd, and it's mostly about the melody that's going over it. If you're trying to use the last substitution we talked about, the tritone substitution, if you have a melody that is going, for instance, when you get to that second chord, the A7, this melody I just played you lands on an A. That A fits in really well with the A7, because it's the root. If you try to do a tritone substitution there, your chord will have this root note, and your melody will have this note. And that tritone,
that's the devil's note.
in this situation doesn't work that well. So you gotta figure out what substitutions work and which don't in said situation. To end it off with number 5, I chose an example that kind of sums it all and adds a little twist on it. We have all heard the chord progression like... And if you listen to jazz or blues or something like it, you've probably heard... And that's cool. Using your minor chord as the 1, using the 6th major chord, then doing a dominant 5 chord to do the resolution. But you can spice it up a little bit more. Let's do it in D minor, for instance. If you try to do that chord progression in D minor, you have... If you want to add the dominant 7th in, or just a major 5 chord, it would sound like... That's fine by itself, and many people play that chord progression doing a 7th chord instead of just the normal triad, like D minor 7th, B flat major 7, then A dominant 7, then resolving back to the D minor 7. But here's a little trick that you can do. And instead of doing an A sharp major 7, you can do an A sharp dominant 7. And to spice it up even more, you could do an A dominant 7 flat 13 instead of just an A dominant 7. And it's pretty easy. You do your A dominant 7, then you use your pinky to bar down to the 2nd string on that same fret, on the 6th fret. Or you could play it like this if you don't want to do the bar with the pinky. And that's kind of a spicy chord, but it works really well in this kind of progression, like... And you don't really need to do both of them at the same time. You can go and change it up. Like, for instance, you could do first the D minor 7 to A sharp major 7, then do the A dominant 7 flat 13th, and then on the second turn, do the D minor 7 to A sharp dominant 7, and then just do an A7 without the flat 13. Like... If you haven't figured out how it works, it's pretty easy. Some people like to think of this A sharp dominant 7th as a tritone substitution for the E7th, making it kind of a 2-5-1 with a minor 7th first, like. It just depends on the way you're thinking about it. Thank you for watching. I've been trying to post videos on YouTube Tuesdays and Thursdays and trying to upload on rest of the days on Instagram, and doing music related videos and trying to be sort of original is hard work. To be completely honest, I'm kind of running out of ideas to do videos on. So please, leave a comment telling me what you thought of the video, what I can improve on, and what kind of videos I should make. As always, I'm giving away free one-on-one Skype lessons. It's free Skype lessons. And all you have to do to win one of these, and discounts on future lessons, is subscribe to my channel, turn on the notifications, like my Facebook page, follow me on Instagram, and then DM me on one of those social media, with screenshots proving that you've did everything before. They are limited though, so be fast. Gotta go fast. Gotta go fast. If you actually learn any of these chords, or any of these chord progressions, movements kind of thing, post it on Instagram and tag me on it. Who knows, perhaps I'll even share it. And I guess that's it. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!